The May primary election is now less than 60 days away, and the race between Ron Paul and Trey Grayson is heating up in the Republican primary. Good evening from WYMT Mountain News. I'm Neil Middleton. Thanks for joining us tonight, and for those watching on the web, thanks for logging on to WYMTnews.com. We are heading into the home stretch, and over the course of the next few weeks, we will hear from all the major candidates in the race to succeed Jim Bunning in the U.S. Senate. Tonight, we begin with Ron Paul. He calls himself a government outsider, a populist, taking on the Republican establishment. We will talk about a wide range of issues, including the controversial health care reform bill, the sluggish economy, the president's energy policy, and new questions about the federal government's role in education reform. That's coming up on Issues and Answers, the Mountain Edition.
Issues and Answers, the Mountain Edition, is sponsored by the City of Hazard. Come home to the mountains. And by Sykes, real people, real solutions.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Let's get to one of the hottest issues right now in the country. Obviously, the president recently signed health care reform into law. Republicans have waged a campaign to repeal and to replace the legislation. First, simple yes or no question, would you have voted for the bill as it passed?
No.
Why?
Well, I don't believe that you can have a $1 trillion bill or a $1 trillion new government program and it's not really going to add anything to the deficit. As I go around and talk to voters in Kentucky, I don't meet anyone who believes it. A $1 trillion plan is really not going to add anything to the deficit. We have example after example of government programs. They're usually 2, 3, 4 times over budget. Cost overruns are the norm in the federal government. And when you make something free, people overutilize it. So the cost will be much higher than they predict, and the deficit will increase because of this.
So you disagree with the Congressional Budget Office report, which says it will actually help reduce the deficit?
And they've been wrong before. Look at the Medicare prescription drug plan. It was going to cost $400 billion. Within a couple years, they had increased that cost to $1 trillion. So even the Congressional Budget Office has gotten it wrong before. But think about it. When you make a government program free, more people use it, and they use it more often than you would predict because it's free.
Now, some critics are concerned that giving that much control over health care to the government will limit their individual choices, maybe even delay life-saving procedures. Democrats say that's just not the case. Right. Do you share those same concerns?
Yeah, I think ultimately when the government takes over more of health care, there's a limited amount of resources. There's always a limited amount of money. So then government has to make the choice of who gets the care. That's called rationing. It already is beginning to happen. For example, under Medicare, without adding all these new people, the current Medicare is short of money every year. There's already programs in place to reduce doctors' fees by 10% each year. What's going to happen when doctors' fees go down 10% a year? Your busy family doctor here in Hazard is going to say, would I rather see Blue Cross patients or Medicare patients? That already exists. So people are going to want to see the private patients, not the Medicare patients. So senior citizens are going to be saying, where do I go to the doctor? They don't want to take Medicare patients. That's going to get worse because the resources, you're going to add 30 million people into this mix. There's already not enough money for the people on Medicare. So what does that do? Makes things tighter. They're going to have to cut doctors' fees further, which makes doctors less inclined to want to see Medicare patients.
Will this have any impact on the number of people that want to go into the medical profession?
Yeah, I think people in medicine, I'm a physician, I talk to doctors every day in the hospital that are demoralized. And I've been in practice 17 years. Do you know that they pay me half as much as what they did 17 years ago? And I still make a good living, but the thing is, it's dwindling all the time, and people who are smart and go to college may say, maybe I'd rather be a TV announcer, one of those rich TV announcers.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, I was going to say, most people are going to look at doctors and they're going to say, you're not hurting for money.
Right, yeah. I think the thing is you're right, and doctors still do very well, but I think also people value the services of their doctor. I mean, if you go in with your 12-year-old and he has an appendicitis tonight and the doctor saves his life, I think you don't begrudge paying the doctor a good living and that doctors do well. But really it needs to be more the marketplace and less the government. I don't want the government paying the doctors all these fees anyway. I'd rather have less government involvement and more private insurance. My whole thing with health insurance was let's bring more competition and more capitalism to health care. Let's don't bring more government. This goes the opposite way. This goes in the direction of Europe, in the direction of having government be in charge of
So you think it's socialized health care?
In aspects of it, yes. I mean, and I don't think that's good. I think what you need to bring prices down is competition. Because the thing is we can include everybody and have the government provide for it, but you'll pay for it one way or another. You're going to pay for it through higher taxes. Do you think in Canada that they don't pay for their health care? Yeah, they just don't pay at the doctor's office. They pay in higher taxes. And the Canadians and the Europeans probably have taxes nearly twice as much as we do.
Republicans say they're going to make this a campaign issue come this fall. Senator McConnell has said basically repeal and replace. President Obama said last week, bring it on. That's a battle that I'm willing to fight. Will Democrats, in your opinion, pay a price at the voting booth for this legislation?
Absolutely, and it's going to be huge. I tell people there's a Tea Party tidal wave coming. It's going to sweep a lot of people out of office. And look at President Obama's approval ratings in Kentucky. Look at the health care plan's approval rating. What, in the 30s in Kentucky? I don't think Kentuckians wanted more government takeover of their health care. And I think Kentuckians are concerned about pre-existing conditions and portability, about their jobs. But I think most Kentuckians that I talk to don't think the government creates jobs. They think that private businesses create jobs. And you look at the President Obama stimulus package, $413,000 per job. I venture to say there weren't many jobs where someone actually gets paid $413,000, but that's what it cost per job under the stimulus package. That's not very efficient use of resources.
You mentioned the Tea Party, and you spoke at a Tea Party rally. I think it was in London on Saturday. Some of the Democrats, some of your opponents have been critical of the Tea Party, calling them a fringe radical group. You've embraced them.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. We had a couple protesters at our rally who were Democratic operatives, but they missed the whole boat, too, because they were jeering at me and saying, oh, well, Bush ran up the deficit, too. And I said, that's what you don't understand. The Tea Party is very honest in giving bipartisan blame for the deficit. I'm very honest in saying, you know, the Medicare prescription drug plan that they were wrong in estimating the cost, passed by Republicans. Biggest entitlement program since the 1960s in LBJ, and I was opposed to it because we don't have the money. It's not that I don't want to help people, but I don't think we help people by running up the deficit.
Let's talk about the deficit. Many people are concerned about the national debt and its impact on the economy, national security. We've got several questions today from Twitter and Facebook. This one comes from Twitter. It says, we are now more than $12 trillion in debt. How can we stop the government from spending more money than we take in?
First thing is they're not to be trusted up there. They passed pay-as-you-go 3 weeks ago, and they already broke their word twice. I think we need stricter rules, and so I'm for a very strict, airtight, balanced budget amendment. In Frankfurt, you know, we've got Republicans who bicker back and forth, but at the end of the day, they have to balance the budget. Let's force them in Washington. And the main reason I say force them, they're not to be trusted. They passed pay-as-you-go, and immediately they say, oh, we have an emergency, and they evade their own rules. So they're not to be trusted.
Anyone up there to be trusted?
Well, let me see. There's a few. There are some good people in Washington, but unfortunately, I think the majority are there to make a career of it. We've made that a big thing in our campaign, outsider, non-politician versus career politician, because the people who want to do it for career, I think when they look at the issues, they look, how can I stay in office? What can I bring you? What kind of federal project or goodie can I bring to the mountains to say, oh, let's name this road after me, or let's name this bridge after me? I think that's a mistake, because that's what's bankrupting our country. But that's what the career politicians do, because they know that's how you buy votes. I'm here to say, look, we're broke as a country, and I'm not going up there just to bring home the bacon, because you know what? We've picked the pig clean. You know, there's not bacon to go around. We're out of money, and we need to face up to it.
Okay, we'll be right back, and we'll continue talking about the national debt and Rand Paul's views on earmarks. That's coming up. We'll be right back.
Just because it's cold outside doesn't mean you can't keep fit and have fun. The Hazard Pavilion has everything you need to keep up your exercise routine. We offer activities for the entire family, such as a heated pool with new slides, tennis courts, weight room, and walking running track. Stop by and check out our refurbished racquetball courts. Don't forget to reserve our party room adjacent to the pool for your special event. Pricing ranges from one-session fees to annual memberships for individuals and families. For more information, call 436-4200. Fun and fitness for the entire family. The Hazard Pavilion.
Welcome back. Republican candidate for U.S. Senate Rand Paul is our guest tonight. Rand, you were in Corbin Saturday night speaking at the Lincoln dinner. You criticized Washington insiders for, quote, selling their souls to get federal funds for pet projects. You've also at times been very tough on Senator Mitch McConnell and Congressman Hal Rogers when it comes to earmarks, which has some people questioning whether you'll be able to work with those two veteran lawmakers if you are elected.
Actually, at the Lincoln Day dinner, I was referring to Senator Ben Nelson, who's actually from the other party, about how he, I believe, sold his soul to get a special provision for Nebraska that didn't apply to any other state where they wouldn't have to pay for Medicaid. And I think that's clearly unconstitutional to have one state get a special privilege. Now, I've never really been critical of Congressman Rogers or Senator McConnell. I'm critical of the system, and I am critical of the system of pork barrel spending and earmarks. I also think we should have term limits. Some people see that as an attack on individuals, but I tell people, you know what? My dad would have to come home. My father's in Congress. If we had term limits, he'd come home too. But I would trade even that for reforming the system, because these career politicians go up and they stay so long that I think they lose sight of what's best for the people. They're too busy pandering and trying to bring a special project home to their state. Like if Kentucky gets it, Ohio doesn't. Problem is Ohio's trying to do the same thing, and so is every other state, and that's why I think we're bankrupt as a country.
So in a region like eastern Kentucky, where we are starved for jobs, where we need economic development, right, we need infrastructure, many times some of those earmarks are the only way that we can get projects moving. So what do you say to the voters here who are saying, okay, if you're not going to do any earmarks, how are we ever going to progress forward?
Right. I would say there's a fallacy in the question if we say government is going to create jobs. I want to bring jobs to the mountains, but I want to bring jobs to the mountains by leaving your money here. If I take your money to Washington, if I take $1 to Washington from taxpayers in the mountain, we swish it around the bureaucracy and you get 50 cents back. And everybody's clamoring to get that 50 cents on the dollar. But 50 cents of it was left in waste and bureaucracy up there. Let's don't send it to Washington in the first place. Let's keep it here in the mountains, and then you will have enough money for your projects and your infrastructure. But the other fallacy of the question is that government creates jobs. Entrepreneurs, private businessmen and women create jobs. That's where useful jobs come from. When government creates jobs, I heard an economist recently use this. He said, you know what? It's like trying to fill up your swimming pool by scooping water out of the deep end and pouring it in the shallow end. It's a zero-sum game. But entrepreneurs can create jobs. Let's get government out of the way of small business. Let's get government out of the way of the coal industry, and the coal industry can create jobs.
You mentioned the coal industry, and your opponent, Trey Grayson, released a commercial a few weeks ago where you were heard saying coal is a very dirty form of energy, and it's probably one of the least favorable forms of energy. So where do you stand on coal?
Well, it's interesting. I think that's number one of about 101 lies that Trey Grayson has been repeating across the state. I'm very pro-coal in the sense that I'm very pro-private property. I think if you own your property, you should be allowed to do with it as you wish as long as you don't pollute your neighbor's property. So I'm in favor of letting the coal mines flatten the mountains, flatten the mountaintops to mine coal, which I call open quarry process, which I think is a better way of putting it because it looks to me like a quarry. I've toured the mountaintops in Hindman and seen the elk roaming. I've been up on the Duffy Farm here in Hazard and seen the cattle roaming there. So I don't have any problem with that. I also think the EPA is overbearing, and we should rein in the EPA, if not sunset their regulations, because it galls me that the EPA says, oh, we're going to just regulate greenhouse emissions whether Congress tells us to or not. That's an out-of-control regulatory agency. I think cap and trade's a disaster. So for my opponent to apply that I'm against coal is ridiculous. Now, I did admit that, yeah, hydroelectric power is cleaner than coal. But 90% of our electricity comes from coal, and it will for another few generations. That's not to mean that we should be against dams, but I think I'm also practical enough to know that dams aren't going to provide all the electricity, and hydroelectric is not going to provide all of our electricity. Coal provides the vast majority of it. We're going to keep doing it. I think it's much cleaner than it was 30 years ago. But, yes, is solar cleaner? Is hydroelectric cleaner? Yeah, but that's not to say I'm against coal. That was a statement taken out of context. And that's, I think, the definition of intellectual dishonesty is when you take a snippet of someone's words and conclude something that was never my intention to conclude.
This race is getting somewhat nasty.
Somewhat nasty.
I mean, on both sides. Nasty. I mean, you've portrayed Trey Grayson as a moderate or as a moderate trying to portray himself as a conservative.
Right. Well, the thing is what I've told Trey is I'll run no negative ads. I have no intention of ever bringing his name up if he'll stop the negative ads. But we will respond. If he attacks me with lies, he's going to get a response right back telling people what the truth is. But I've asked him repeatedly to his face, stop the lies, and we won't run any negative ads on you. We won't let everybody know you were a Bill Clinton person. We won't let everybody know you're a Democrat. We won't let everybody know you are the establishment moderate if you'll quit attacking us. But he has a lot of things he has to defend. He has to defend why was he a Democrat? Why was he a Bill Clinton supporter? Those aren't real things that are popular in a Republican primary.
So you're basically calling Trey Grayson a liar.
Absolutely. He's intellectually dishonest. That's probably a better way of putting it. It's intellectually dishonest to draw a conclusion, to take words out of context. He doesn't even take whole sentences. He takes 3 words from a sentence and leaves out the rest of the sentence. I think he does dishonor to himself, and I think he shows himself not to be someone who could be a leader for our state, because that's just, do we want someone who's that profoundly dishonest about someone?
You all have gone back and forth on who's refusing to debate each other, too. What's going on with that?
He's dishonest there, too. I've accepted 5 or 6 debates. I will debate before anybody that's impartial. We're going to be in Barbersville April 5th, Bowling Green April 13th. I've debated him in Paducah. He didn't come to 2 debates, University of Louisville Republicans, Louisville Tea Party. He didn't show up for either one of them. I'm going to be debating Wednesday against, I think Jack Conway is going to be there at the Home Builders Association in Northern Kentucky in Trey's background. He's not coming. So it's absurd for him to say I won't debate. I mean, I just listed 6 or 7 debates I've accepted.
Would you accept a one-on-one debate here at WYMT?
Absolutely. We'd love to. We think you're impartial. In fact, I think you're moderating one, aren't you? I think you're moderating
one
in
Barbersville.
Yes. And that was one of the reasons I agreed to do it, because I think you are from the media and you were objective. And we also agreed to do other ones that had. There was a moderator, an ex-news anchor in Paducah who did one, and we agreed to do that. We won't agree to do it. If you'd given $1,000 to Grayson, I won't come and debate if you're the moderator. That's not fair. You know, and that's the kind of debates he wants to go to, is where the moderator has written favorable things about him or is a $1,000 donor of his, and that's just ridiculous.
You mentioned earlier, you mentioned cap and trade. We've talked about this before. How will you vote on that if you're elected and the bill is still pending?
Absolutely opposed to cap and trade, and will vote against cap and trade. I tell people, even if we had no coal, I'd be against cap and trade, because it's going to be a big tax on people. People who are young and starting their way up the socioeconomic ladder, they can least afford another $300, $400, $500 on their electric bill each month. It's just not going to happen.
What are the other impacts that you think it will have, especially here in eastern Kentucky?
Well, I think it's essentially going to be a tax on utilization of electricity, and I think that's a problem. But it also, I think, will be something it's intended, really, to slow down the coal industry. And it's intended for the government to switch things. Problem is that most of the other forms of electricity that we would have, nuclear or dams or whatever you have, take a long time to build. And so they're going to try to squash the coal industry, and there's no other alternative. So I tell people, if you have cap and trade, be prepared to have candles for your electricity at night.
Okay. Rand Paul is our guest here on Issues and Answers tonight. He's running in the Republican primary for the U.S. Senate. When we return, we'll get his views on what his plans are to bring jobs to eastern Kentucky. We'll be right back.
Most people want to know, what is Sykes?
There are 600 employees at Sykes Enterprises in Perry County. It takes a lot of customer service representatives to answer calls from thousands of people across the country. We train each employee in-house.
Training is so much fun. We do cheers and play games, and that positive attitude spreads throughout the day.
We want people to hear our smiles over the phone.
I get more than a paycheck at Sykes. I feel appreciated.
We are Sykes.
And welcome back. Let's talk about your plan. One of the big issues here in eastern Kentucky, obviously, is jobs. You touched on it just a few minutes ago. But what is your plan to bring new jobs, good-paying jobs, to this region?
Right. I think the way we bring jobs in is we need to get the government out of the way. First, we acknowledge that government doesn't create jobs. We can also, though, acknowledge that government destroys jobs. See, I blame government for the recession. Right now we're in a recession, so like if you live out here and the unemployment's 12 or 13 or maybe 15%, before the recession it was 7 or 8% or less. So why did the unemployment figures double in eastern Kentucky. Why have they doubled across the country? Because of government involvement in manipulating the interest rates. So what did government do after 2001? They made the interest rates zero. So everybody bought a house. And then they came to you and said, oh, you don't have a down payment? Here's a $150,000 house. Next year your house was worth $170,000. You said, oh, you've got $20,000 in equity. Why don't you build a swimming pool? Foolishness that the government got started. 80% of loans now go through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. You know that Fannie Mae lost $16 billion last quarter? They've lost money for 10 quarters in a row. But you know what our governmental answer is? Unlimited credit for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We're trying to spur another housing boom by just saying, here's more money, go buy a house. We don't care if you have any savings or any down payment. We don't care if you can make your payments, just go buy a house. We got to get this engine started again. So I'd say we create jobs, one, by let's get the government out of the business of manipulating interest rates, causing the boom and bust cycle to worsen. And we're in the bust part of the cycle now. Someone deserves blame, but it's not capitalism, it's not entrepreneurs, it's government. So what we have to do is get out of the recession. You know how you get out of a recession? You have to reach a bottom. So housing prices have to go down, but if I make interest rates 0%, I'm keeping housing prices up by spurring demand for houses. It's disadvantageous if you own a house for the price to go down, but let's say you make $20,000 a year and have 3 kids, and a $150,000 house becomes worth $75,000. If you're buying a house, it's good. So it can spur the economy to let prices drop, but you have to let prices drop. That's not as easy as just saying, oh, I'll get you a factory with 10,000 jobs, but it's part of the answer we have to acknowledge is how did we get here in order to figure out how we get out of the recession. But I think we get jobs and we get out of the recession, less regulation, low taxes. Let's make the mountains an economic development area by reducing your tax load, by making some tax-free zones out here where you don't have to pay the taxes to get companies, to encourage companies to come into eastern Kentucky.
Would that be your vision for eastern Kentucky?
Absolutely. Encourage private enterprise, encourage capitalism, encourage competition, but it won't be just something for nothing. I mean, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And I'm not just going to say, and I can't say this, it's not honest, and I have no business running for office. I'm just going to say, oh, I'll bring you $100 million to Hazard, and here it'll be this free money. That's our problem as a country, is everybody looks at federal dollars and says, oh, it's free. I'll just grab some and elect me for 40 years and I'll grab more. But it's sort of a selfish way of looking at government, that it's your ATM and you're just going to bring it all home. But we're bankrupt as a country. We're spending $4 trillion a year, and we're only bringing in about $2.4 trillion. There's a big problem with our balance sheet, and ultimately we all pay the penalty for that. You get that bright, shiny new building, but your money's being destroyed. So if you're a senior citizen, you live in the mountains, you're living on a fixed income, your money's being stolen from you. Your savings is being stolen from you because they're destroying the value of your currency in order to pay for the debt. So you can't have it both ways. There is no free lunch.
The President has promised, speaking of lunches, the President has promised to overhaul the No Child Left Behind law. He says he wants to reward schools that show, quote, real progress. What role do you see the federal government taking in education?
Very little. In fact, I think we do way too much at the federal level. There's no constitutional provision for education to be administered at the federal level. Interestingly, if you interview teachers, if you had 100 teachers come through your program, ask them whether they like No Child Behind. I'll bet you 90% of them are opposed to it. But you know what? If you go and talk to the NEA, the National Education Association, which is the union of teachers, they'll say, oh, yeah, we admit teachers don't like it, but let's double the funding. That's a mistake of government. We don't like a government program and it fails, so what do we do? Instead of get rid of it, let's double the funding for it. But most teachers don't like No Child Left Behind. I don't like it either because I want the teachers to have more control at the local level, the principals, the school board, the parents. But I don't want some distant politician in Washington telling you in the mountains how to run your schools. So
instead of overhauling it, would you just kill it altogether?
I'd eliminate the Department of Education, yes. I think we could save quite a bit of money, and that money could be spent locally.
So you would eliminate the entire...
The entire department. It used to be a part of our platform. It was part of the Republican platform all throughout the 1980s to get rid of the Department of Education. It's only about, I think it was originated in maybe the late 1970s. It doesn't mean I'm opposed to education. It means I'm for local control of education, and I'm for empowering teachers and parents to participate and decide in Perry County, about education, but not in Washington.
The president also said he wants to reform our financial system so that consumers are better protected and the economy safeguarded from another depression.
Right. I see the government as a problem. I don't think it's that we need to control the economy, that the economy got out of control. Government's out of control. So if we're going to have new regulations, let's have new regulations on the Federal Reserve telling them that they can't create money out of thin air, that they can't buy assets and not tell us what they're buying. Let's have them have less control over manipulating the interest rates up and down on a daily basis. I blame the government for the recession, not private entrepreneurs.
Here's another question from Facebook. This is from Kevin in Lexington, and he asks, do you consider yourself to be more conservative or libertarian in your political philosophy?
Right. I call myself a constitutional conservative, and that means that I believe that the federal government should operate under enumerated powers. The Constitution has 17 to 20 enumerated powers for Congress, depending on how you read them. But they say Congress can do this, and Congress is not supposed to be doing anything else. We specifically put the 9th and 10th Amendment in the Bill of Rights saying if the Constitution does not enumerate a power, that power is left to the people in the states respectively. And I want much more power to devolve homeward to either state government or to the individual.
When we last spoke in September, you were trailing in this election. Today, a recent poll shows that you have a double-digit lead over your opponent, Trey Grayson. Is the campaign where you thought it would be? And I should mention that in that poll, 19% are still undecided, so the poll could be very close, this race.
Right. People ask me if I'm surprised, and I say, no, I'm astounded. You know, I really am amazed at how far we've come in this. I fully expected a year ago we'd be 10 points down now ourselves because I am the outsider. All the establishment is opposed to me. I mean, you name an important person in Kentucky, they're on the other side. But what I have on my side are the issues. I have the secret weapon of the Tea Party and an uneasiness that's out there, a worry and a concern about the debt, and a belief that the career politicians will not change anything, that they want a job. All they want is another job and to go to Washington for the rest of their life and go to nice parties. That's what they want. They don't really care about the debt, or they care about playing the game of bringing home the bacon. I'm not part of that game. I'm not part of that system. I'm a straight shooter that says we have serious problems in the country, and I can't promise you something for nothing.
Your opponent and some of your critics have also said that a lot of the money that you're raising comes from outside of Kentucky.
You know, the interesting thing is we have the same amount of donors as my opponent from in the state. We have over 2,000 donors in Kentucky, and so does he. And we have about 10,000 more from around the country. But we've raised a good chunk of our money from Kentucky, and we're only getting votes in Kentucky. And the only people answering those polls are Kentuckians. So we're doing quite well in Kentucky, and I'm proud of how well we're doing.
We have about 1 minute left. I'm going to give you a chance to just tell the voters why they should vote for Rand Paul.
All right. Well, I think we're drowning in a sea of debt. I think we're being consumed by it. We're destroying our kids' future. We're leaving them an inheritance of debt. Our number one export now as a country is our debt. I don't think a country that lives beyond its means can continue this way. I think eventually we'll live beneath our means, and it's coming in rapid fashion. And not only is it the debt burden for the future, it's the debt burden that tells your kids if they're graduating from college this year, I may not get a job because government's soaking up so much money in Washington that there may not be enough money for a private job. So government's not your friend. Government is part of the problem. We need to make government smaller.
Okay. Rand Paul, thank you for coming again. Thank you for joining us. We'll hear from the other candidates in the weeks and days ahead. Thanks for joining us. We hope to see you again next week for another edition of Issues and Answers, the Mountain Edition. Have a good night.
Issues and Answers, the Mountain Edition, is sponsored by the City of Hazard. Come home to the mountains. And by Sykes, real people, real solutions.